In this video, we will discuss misandry in education as it intersects with perspectives on sexual orientation. Although this video branches off somewhat from what we regularly discuss, since sexual orientation is not the primary focus of this series, it is still relevant because it ties in very strongly with our sub-series on rape hysteria in education, a phenomenon which is largely premised upon an animosity and fear of male sexuality. Although much of the misandry in academia in regards to sexuality is directed toward male heterosexuality, there is no reason to assume that this animosity will not extend to male sexuality in general. Dr. Peggy Sandy is a feminist anthropologist who spends a lot of time talking about her belief that the culture of college fraternities encourages rape. She has an interesting perspective on how this intersects with homosexuality, which she argues in a somewhat convoluted way on pages 64 and 82 of her book Fraternity Gang Rape. Her argument has been cited by numerous feminists throughout academia, but is best summarized by feminist professors Carol Balmer and Andrea Perot in their book Sexual Assault on Campus. They say, Peggy Sandy suggests that gang rape is often the means by which homophobic men who want to share a sexual experience with other men are able to do so through a woman. Sandy believes that these men want to have sex with each other, but will not do so because of the societal taboo against homosexual behavior. Therefore, they select a woman whom they do not know, and have sex with her in the presence of their male friends, as a means of sharing a sexual experience in a socially acceptable, heterosexual way. This process is unspoken, and perhaps unconscious, because these men would never admit to wanting to have sex with another man. I wanted very much to see whether there was any kind of study Dr. Sandy was citing to support her conclusion, so I checked out her book Fraternity Gang Rape, only to find that there is no study. It is simply a dogmatic proclamation that Dr. Sandy assumes to be self-evident, based upon nothing more than her expertise as a feminist anthropologist. Moving on, I'm going to rapidly string together a few relevant passages from several books written by feminist professors who disagree with a substantial amount of what has been going on in certain quarters of academia. I'll introduce these books and their authors briefly. Professors Daphne Patai and Nareta Kurdga are both former women's studies professors who together authored the book Professing Feminism, Cautionary Tales from the Strange World of Women's Studies, where they critique women's studies departments based upon their own experiences, as well as their interviews with numerous students who tell them what had been going on in their other women's studies classes. Dr. Patai also authored Heterophobia, which deals a lot with the problems of sexual harassment claims in academia. We will discuss her work more when we talk about male teachers who are railroaded by frivolous and malicious claims. Lastly, Dr. Christina Hoff-Sommers authored Who Stole Feminism, a highly recommended book about extreme feminism in general in academia. In Professing Feminism, one of the authors says, I also, by the way, had two students who were taking a class who came to me complaining that they were being treated unfairly because they were heterosexual women. They and the other heterosexuals had been asked to identify themselves at the beginning, with the suggestion that by the end of the term, if the course were successful, there would be no heterosexuals left. One of them had been asked to do extra papers. I actually went to the ombudsman about this, because a married woman with kids was being asked to do extra work as a kind of punishment, because she had been stubborn about her sexual orientation. One women's studies professor told us she said this to her students, Personally, I can't imagine why any woman would want to have a relationship with a man, but since some do, we have to try to respect them. Reports of such student experiences, among others, fill the pages of their book. Dr. Christina Hoff-Sommers tells us of the experiences of another women's studies student. Heather Kina, a senior at the University of Minnesota, wrote, I was made to feel as though I was dependent and weak for preferring men to women as sexual partners, and to feel that my opinions were not only insignificant, but somehow twisted. They're in this classroom in which things are exploding, in which they are made to feel guilty because they're white or because they're heterosexual or whatever, and they just don't know how to even begin to think about it. These are young people who are not only trying to figure out what they believe intellectually, but are also emotionally fragile. It's a period of youth typically questioning their own identity, sexual issues, all of it, and it's dangerous. Women's studies can be harmful. Dr. Hoff-Sommers quotes Professor Joyce Treblecott of Washington University, who says, If the classroom situation is very heteropatriarchal, a large beginning class of 50 or 60 students, say with few feminist students, I'm likely to define my task as largely one of recruitment, of persuading students that women are oppressed. But by whom exactly are these female students oppressed? By none other than the male students sitting next to them in class, or the young men with whom they have formed relationships. On its face, there's something inherently problematic with teaching impressionable students that they are victims. Doctors Patai and Kurdga break it down. Women obviously are justifiably angry about many things, but to generate and cultivate anger in a classroom setting strikes us as irresponsible, especially since many of the techniques used to arouse and sustain such an emotion are manipulative, and most professors have no special ability to deal with the ensuing problems. Another problem, beyond simply that of teaching victimhood, is that the views of a great many feminist professors are pretty far out there. As we recall from our video on rape hysteria by faculty and administrators, many feminist professors advocate a widely expanded definition of rape. Consider this example, one among many, by Professors Margaret Gordon and Stephanie Reiger, who advocate that sex after a date is rape simply because the man paid for the date. Quote, "The American dating system, which constitutes a primary source of heterosexual contacts, legitimizes the consensual purchase of women as sexual objects, and obliterates the crucial distinction between consent and non-consent." Here's another one. Feminist professor Marilyn Frye authored an article titled "Lesbian Feminism and the Gay Rights Movement, Another View of Male Supremacy, Another Separatism." Although in her article she primarily talks about the gay rights movement, she digresses to talk about heterosexuality in this way. Fucking is a large part of how females are kept subordinated to males. It is a ritual enactment of that subordination, which constantly reaffirms the fact of subordination, and habituates both men and women to do it, both in body and in imagination. A great deal of fucking is also presumed to preserve and maintain women's belief in our own essential heterosexuality, which in turn, for women as not for men, connects with and reinforces female heteroeroticism, that is, man-loving in women. It is very important to the maintenance of male supremacy that men fuck women, a lot. So it is required. It is compulsory. Doing it is both doing one's duty and an expression of solidarity. Feminist professors D. Grahan at the University of Cincinnati and Roberta Rigsby at Miami University together authored Loving to Survive, Sexual Terror, Men's Violence, and Women's Lives. They rationalize the passage by Dr. Frey in this way. While many women report that men are most kind to them during sex, Frey uses this language because it is the language of men, and thus reflects men's feelings about making love with women. This point is important. The word fucking is assaultive, because the behavior that the word connotes is assaultive. And here, by describing fucking as inherently assaultive, we see the rhetorical sleight of hand that some feminist professors use to blend normal, healthy, and even loving sexual intercourse with sexual assault. So what happens when you have extreme professors in a position of authority teaching impressionable students to see themselves as victims? In response to such goings-on, Dr. Patai says, "What is a heterosexual woman to do when she is told that male potency is a threat, that the penis is an instrument of domination, that her own sexual fantasies may be betraying her indoctrination into patriarchal norms? How productive are such tensions?" Dr. Hoff-Sommers tells us this story from a student she interviewed. Annie Ballard, a graduate of Harvard, felt her private life to be intolerably incorrect, being in conflict with what she was learning in the feminist classroom. She had been persuaded that heterosexual lovemaking was basically a violation. Annie says to Dr. Sommers, "While taking women's studies with a separatist fellow teaching there, I nearly had a nervous breakdown because I thought my boyfriend of 5 years was raping me every time he penetrated me." This should give a good idea as to how damaging it can be for extreme professors to teach students the politics of victimhood. It should also remind us that a teacher does not have to directly express hostility toward male students in order to create a hostile learning environment for them. All he or she has to do is indoctrinate female students into the idea that normal and even loving male behavior is inherently abusive, and then, like a replicating virus, the female students will carry those attitudes into their relationships with friends, acquaintances, and loved ones. Returning to Dr. Fry's article, which again is titled Lesbian Feminism and the Gay Rights Movement, Another View of Male Supremacy, Another Separatism. In this article, she argues that there can never be any kind of alliance between lesbian feminism and the gay rights movement. She says, "In many states and locales, lesbians and gay men find themselves joined under a common political necessity when they must battle a proposition this or that which would legally sanction their civil injury. Such things might lead one to suppose that there is, in fact, a cultural and political affinity between gay men on the one hand and women lesbians and or feminists on the other. I do not share this supposition. A look at some of the principles and values of male supremacist society and culture suggests immediately that the male gay rights movement and gay male culture, as they can be known in their public manifestations, are in many central points considerably more congruent than discrepant with this phallocracy, which in turn is so hostile to women and to the woman-loving to which lesbians are committed. In fact, as some gay men have understood, even if the popular mind has not, gay men generally are in significant ways, perhaps in all important ways, only more loyal to masculinity and male supremacy than other men. The one general and nearly inviolable limitation on male phallic access is that males are not supposed to fuck other males, especially adult human males of their own class, tribe, race, etc. This is the one important rule of phallocratic culture that most gay men do violate, and this violation is central to what is defended and promoted by the male gay rights movement. The feminist lesbian style, activities, desire, and values are obviously and profoundly non-congruent with the principles of male supremacist culture. She does not love men. She does not preserve all passion and significant exchange for men. She does not hate women. She presupposes the equality of the female and male bodies, or even the superiority or normativeness of the female body. One might wonder, if the female body is normative, what exactly does that make the male body? Well, nothing more than abnormal, of course. Dr. Fry then describes the gay rights movement in this way. Note the form of this deviation from the rules of the male supremacist game. It is refusing a limitation on phallic access. It is a refusal to restrain the male self. It is an excess of phallic arrogance. The fundamental principle is that of universal phallic access. What is in dispute is only a qualification of it. Gay male culture does not deny or shun the principle of male supremacism. It embraces it. In other words, gay male sexuality in and of itself supports the belief that everything should be accessed by the penis, therefore extending the quote-unquote dominion a man has from women to include other men. In addition, some gay men act masculine themselves, and gay men also, problematically according to Dr. Fry, do not allow, as she puts it, the, quote, superiority or normativeness of the female body. That is why, according to Dr. Fry, gay men can never be allies with lesbian feminism. I would suggest an alternative, that the real reason such an alliance is unlikely to establish strong roots is that for far too many, lesbianism and female homoeroticism are less about loving women than they are about hating men. And given the fact that gay men are men, it is this misandry, far more than any psychologically projected feminist nonsense, that prevents any true solidarity between feminists and gay men who, quite rightly, do not wish to trade in one form of demonization for another. While numerous lesbian feminists may claim to support the idea of rights for gay men to form relationships, cohabitate, and marry, I would argue that for many of them, especially those who are among the staunchest advocates of lesbian rights, this support is superficial for this reason. Pervasive throughout much of their advocacy is a deep distrust, resentment, and fear, a phobia, in other words, of anything to do with male sexuality, including male sexual gratification in and of itself, which need not always be heterosexual. And so it may be true that many lesbian feminists support the right of gay men to marry gay men. But does this automatically mean that they respect them? For example, it is also true that many white racists support the right of blacks to marry other blacks. But why? Is it because they respect them and care about their well-being? Or is it because they want them to stick to their own kind and live downtown? This video is titled Teaching Misandry Through Homophobia and Heterophobia. It could just as easily be titled Teaching Homophobia and Heterophobia Through Misandry. As a women's studies professor might say, there is some intersectionality in how it plays out. The main idea we should walk away with is this: misandry is a common enemy of the common man. It does not matter if you are black or white, gay or straight, religious, agnostic, or atheist, where you were born or where you live. It is a pervasive, yet largely unrecognized phenomenon, and it is long past time that we address it. Thanks for watching.